Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. If you're new around here on my channel, my name is Harmon. Today's video has got to be, without a doubt, one of the most tragic and saddening cases that I've ever come across. Of course, I'm going to show you guys the grave of the victim, Rachel Burkheimer, but I'm also going to talk about the case, give you guys as much details as possible, and then go from there. There's no need to put any hate on the victim, Rachel. Yes, she might have made some poor decisions. However, that doesn't justify what happened to her and doesn't justify her being murdered. So the date of Rachel Burkheimer's murder was September 23rd, 2002. Rachel was 18 years old at the time of her murder. Her family actually put in a missing persons report about 4 days later on September 27th, 2002. On the day that she was murdered, she told her parents that she was going to go drop off a friend at the airport. And unfortunately, that never happened, and she never returned home. Rachel lived on the Tulalip Indian Reservation, and that's actually where she went to school. Her friends and family described her as extremely outgoing, loved to be around friends. When she was younger, her parents actually thought she might be deaf or partially deaf because she apparently didn't talk until she turned 3 years old. She was a super bubbly person. So August 2001, about a year or so prior to her being murdered, her emotions and behavior really changed. And her parents think it's because she lost one of her best friends to a really bad car accident. And after that, she lost an additional 6 friends to some other kind of accidents. And so after all that happened, she went from that bubbly, outgoing personality to dropping out of school, the Marysville Pilchuck High School, doing drugs, hanging out with the wrong crowd, including starting to date a guy who was involved with a gang. She transitioned to a kind of like an alternative school, but she dropped out of that as well, and she ended up just working at a pizza place. And Rachel started dating a guy named John Diggy Anderson. And Anderson was, again, involved in a gang that they called themselves the Northwest Mafia. But basically all they did every day was drink, do drugs, and sell drugs. That's kind of the culmination of what they did every day. And so Rachel, of course, started dating John Anderson, and they all would hang out together with John's other gang buddies. Again, not a smart idea for anyone, let alone a young 18-year-old girl who, kind of was trying to find her place in life. So Rachel's father, Bill, actually ended up finding out that Rachel was dating John Anderson after he received a phone bill, and the phone bill came from the Washington State Department of Corrections. In other words, John Anderson was in and out of prison. Rachel was calling him, while he was incarcerated at the prison. So Rachel confided in her sister and her family after John began making some serious threats against her. Her sister also stated that she saw some bruises on Rachel's body, kind of suggesting that Anderson beat her from time to time. Around September 2002, shortly before Rachel was murdered, she ended up meeting another guy from the Northwest Mafia, an 18-year-old named Maurice Rivas. So Maurice actually reportedly was trying to leave or get out of the gang, and that is what he told Rachel. And so they became friends as I guess she saw the good in him, and she wanted to help him get out of the gang. So John Anderson told his fellow gang buddies and Maurice a bunch of lies that Rachel had kind of given away some of their gang secrets. He was just pissed off at Rachel. And about a month later, September 23rd, 2002, the evening that Rachel was murdered, Rachel, Maurice, and several other of the gang members were hanging out at a house in Everett. They were smoking marijuana, doing other drugs, and just partying. And John Anderson was outside and kind of just witnessed all his friends having a good time. And for whatever reason, that pissed him off. Maybe because he saw Rachel in there having a good time without him. I'm not sure. But either way, he went inside the house and started just attacking his so-called gang buddies or friends, punching several of them in the face. Several of the gang members pulled out their guns, and that is when Rachel attempted to leave. John Anderson and a few of the gang buddies grabbed Rachel and started beating her, kicking her, and ended up tying her up and gagging her and stuffing her in the garage of the house. They left her there in the garage for a while, still alive at the time, but they kind of were talking and trying to figure out what they wanted to do. There was a small glimmer of hope though for Rachel, as one of the gang members' girlfriends was the owner of the house, and she ended up coming home right then, and she saw Rachel tied up in the garage, and she attempted to set Rachel free. John Anderson told her no, like, you're not going to untie her, you're not going to let her go. So the gang members, including John Anderson, took Rachel, stuffed her into like a black duffel bag, obviously big enough to fit her in, and they stuffed her into the back of a Jeep. They then decided to drive about 30 minutes or so east into the woods. Once Maurice Rivas, John Anderson, and the rest of the gang get to their destination in about 30 minutes east of Everett, they then decide they need to go get shovels and other supplies. They end up leaving Maurice with Rachel there. Rachel pleads with Maurice to let her go, as she knows that she's probably going to die. And even though Rachel and Maurice had become new friends, and pretty good friends at that, Maurice decided that he wanted to stay loyal to his friend John Anderson and the gang, and so he ended up just telling Rachel that he didn't think they would actually kill her. However, he was wrong. So once the rest of the gang return with all the shovels, they start digging Rachel's grave. And at this point, Rachel is back in the duffel bag, and so she starts making noises, and that is when John Anderson picks up a shovel and starts smacking his duffel bag with Rachel inside as hard as he can. They pull her out, take off all her clothes and everything else while they finish digging her grave, and so she has to stand there and basically watch as they finish digging her grave. Just one of the most heart-wrenching things. I can't even fathom what those last moments must have been like for her. They finish digging her grave while she's standing there watching. She then tells them that she wants to walk to the grave on her own. Her last moments are her kneeling down in the grave, praying, and that is when John Anderson pulls out a gun he brought with him and unloads the clip into her. The gun apparently jammed, and he fixed the jam and he shot several more times. Anyway, after they kill Rachel, they cover up the grave. They of course make a vow that they're not going to tell anyone about what they just did. A few days after the murders, a tip came in to the police from one of the gang members' parents, who stated that one of the vehicles involved in the abduction and murder belonged to one of the other gang members named Matthew Durham, and the gang members ended up using his red Jeep to transport Rachel and the supplies that they went back to get. And so once the police knew that the Jeep that belonged to Matthew Durham was involved in the abduction and murder, police rounded up all 8 of the gang members and eventually got them all to kind of turn on each other. And so several of the gang members got some plea deals in exchange for all the testimony against John Anderson. Thanks to some of the gang members for turning on each other, they finally gave the police the coordinates to where they killed and buried Rachel. And so about 10 days after Rachel was abducted and murdered, and they went and found Rachel's body there in the woods. So John Anderson received life in prison for his main role in Rachel's murder, as he was the one who pulled the trigger and of course kind of helped plan the murder itself. Anyway guys, just wanted to say thank you so much for watching. Again, my name is Harmon. I'll see you guys on the next video. Take it easy.